Hey there, and welcome. I'm Anna Hartman, and this is Unreal Results, a podcast where I help you get better outcomes and gain the confidence that you can help anyone, even the most complex cases. Join me as I teach about the influence of the visceral organs and the nervous system on movement, pain, and injuries, all while shifting the paradigm of what whole body assessment and treatment really looks like. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome to another episode of the Unreal Results podcast. I'm back at you from home, from my office in San Diego, California, which is currently in a deep, dark winter. Now, apparently it's been like gray 84% of the days of the months the last few months, which is very abnormal for us. Normally it's like this time of year, normally it's like 50% of the days are gray. It's like the coldest June we've had for a while, which is tough. The gray makes me feel like I live back in Oregon, and this is why I don't live in the beautiful Pacific Northwest, because the gray. But anyways, supposedly it's supposed to be sunny for the rest of the week, starting today at 3 p.m., but I'll believe it when I see it. I took last week off. Was traveling in Europe, like I said on the last podcast, and what happened, I was like good. I was feeling good, like getting working on my athlete, seeing all the sights, going on walks and seeing the city. And then we got to the Netherlands, and which was beautiful, by the way. I really liked it. Our first stop was Hengelo, Netherlands, and it was so beautiful. It was so quiet where we were staying. It almost felt like we were camping. You could hear the wind, the leaves and the trees with the wind, and it's just really green and beautiful day, like great temperature, sunny, just felt like a great day. So when we got to the hotel, I took a little nap with the door to the patio open just to have the fresh air, which I thought was fresh air. And that night I swallowed some supplements, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have a really sore throat. And that was weird. And the next day I was like still itchy, sore throat, a little bit of a cough, started to feel congested, and I was like, what's happening? And then it turned into like a full-blown allergy attack / sinus. I wouldn't say sinus infection. It wasn't an infection, but like some very acute sinusitis. And I felt good except for all of that. Like I wasn't tired. Like I don't think I was sick by any means. Just the allergies got me. And I was not the only person on the track circuit that was in Netherlands and all of a sudden got a bunch of allergies. So at least that confirmed that it was allergies. The other confirmation was that it was allergies. It was literally as soon as we left Amsterdam. We went from Hengelo, and then we went over to the coast. We stayed in Den Haag, Netherlands, which was so awesome. Great food, super walkable, such a great little downtown. And then it's on the coast, so I got to put my feet in the North Sea, and which was surprisingly not as cold as I thought. I thought for sure North Sea was going to be cold. Not at all. Super windy though, but beautiful. Kind of weird to be somewhere where the sun didn't set till so late, but it was great. But it's literally as soon as we left Amsterdam and landed in Paris, my allergies were 80% better. And every day that I was away from that, they were better and better. And I'm just left over with a little bit of like residual congestion, which is totally my pattern, whether it's allergies or a cold. It just takes a long time to get out of my sinuses. And man, that allergy attack and those days of allergies in the Netherlands, we were there. Gosh, we were in the Netherlands for Saturday to Tuesday, I think. Yeah, I believe Saturday to Tuesday. And that just like crushed me. By the time I got to Paris, I was just kind of like tired of not being able to breathe through my nose. And then also I wanted to be able to spend some time doing stuff. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a break from the podcast and took the week off. And it was good. And actually like kind of took everything off. I didn't work on a lot of business stuff or emails or like I thought I was going to do. And I just tried to be in the moment and be in the experience. And, you know, who knows when I'll be back, if I'll ever be back. And I just didn't want to waste it working. And it's also sort of the theme for this year is like, as much as I want to grow my business, it's also like, I just want to be where my feet are. And I want to be really present for the experiences and opportunities and people that I am around. And that just sometimes means to say no and take more time and not open the computer and not do the to-do list all the time and not create as much content and not create as much stuff. Just to be. And so that is part of it. So like I said, great trip. My athlete, he had a great trip. Every race he got better. We had high hopes for Paris and the race in Paris, which was the last race. And unfortunately, he messed up his start in the semifinal and fell on the first hurdle. So did not finish and did not make the final. And so that was a little heartbreaking to end the trip like that, especially when he was feeling so good and racing so well and like progressing each race. But, you know, it happened. And so that's where we're at. And we analyzed what happened and are making changes and focusing on all the positives of the trip instead of focusing on that. So I joked and I said the whole reason really he didn't qualify was because we wanted to go see the Eiffel Tower at night when it was sparkling. It sparkles, lights up and sparkles every hour on the hour after dark till 11:45. And had he been in the final, we would not have made it. So I was like, that's really why you didn't finish. But checked all the boxes in Paris. Paris and Italy were really cool for me to walk around. Fun fact, you may or may not know, I started college as an architecture student. So I took architecture classes and many art history classes. And actually, even after I changed my major to exercise and movement science, I continued to take a lot of art history classes because it's just something that I really enjoy and was interested in. And so it was really cool to walk through Florence and walk through Paris and see all the things that I had once saw in my art history books. And it was just like so cool to see the pages of the art history books come to life. And even though I wasn't able to go in a lot of the structures and see the interior parts of the architecture that I really would have liked to, because I was not prepared and did not get tickets in advance. Heads up for anybody headed to those places. Maybe you know more than I do and you know you need tickets for a lot of these things. And summer is like high tourist season in Europe. And so whenever I looked to get tickets, it was like a week out from when I was there, minimum. So anyways, but even then, like just walking through the town and just seeing the history and the old architecture, and it was so cool. I really appreciated that. And it's just like so wild actually to think about in the United States how we don't have a whole lot of that because our country is so young comparatively to the countries in Europe. And yeah, I really enjoyed that experience. And like I said, I'm just really so grateful that I was able to do it and be present for it. So 10 out of 10 recommend. I was a little disappointed by the Louvre, to be honest. As a person who likes art, the energy inside the Louvre with people just trying to like get through and take pictures of the Mona Lisa and take pictures to like show that they've been to the Louvre is a little misses the mark for me a little bit. Takes away from the art, takes away from the history and the significance and even the architecture of that building. So that was a little disappointing. You know, the Mona Lisa, I would have really liked to like stand in front of it and stare at it for a while, but it literally has a huge line with everybody's cameras up looking at it, and they just like usher you through quickly and allow you to take one picture of it and then move out of the way. And that actually made me really sad. Really sad. And anyways, that's a whole nother conversation. So we're 11 minutes into the podcast and I haven't started talking about anything, but obviously I wanted to share about my trip. So if you haven't checked it out already on my Instagram, I put a few reels together of each location we were at on the trip. So we were in Morocco, Rabat, Morocco, and then Florence, Italy, Hengelo, and Den Haag, Netherlands, and then Paris, France. And so I did a little reel for each of them, and yeah, enjoy. Looking forward to the next trip. So anyways, this podcast episode is part 3 of my lessons from my back surgery, and kind of left you on part 2 talking about sort of the transition from like an exercise standpoint and learning about the missing pieces of relating to reflexive core stability. And so that's really what this podcast episode is about, is like what I learned about this reflexive core stability. So one of there's 2 pieces to it. I started to touch on it when it comes last episode, but when it comes to reflexive core control, most people probably think of it when they think of exercises from Gray Cook's functional movement screen programming, you know, with his original like chops and lifts, like Palloff presses, pull downs and movements. So all these things basically like creating some sort of resistance that you're moving across your body, or creating some kind of resistance that you're connecting into in your body and then moving your limbs, right? To create some reflexive trunk stiffness, because we know it's the reflexive stability that really is what we need in our core to maintain really good spinal health and movement patterns, right? Like having really good movement, proximal stability for good, efficient movement. Now, the reflexiveness, you know, the studies really show that even just thinking about moving my limb, I have a pre-activation of my core control. And so this is what I'm speaking of with reflexiveness. So this is hard to create in a very non-reflexive, purely cognitive or conscious control sort of way. So how then do we ensure this connection? And it really relies in sort of even the definition of stability. So if you look to the original journal or research article by Punjabi et I think that was the last name of the researcher, that defined stiffness or defined stability. It is defined as much stiffness as required for the anticipated load. So in a reflexive stability standpoint, it would be the reflexive amount of stiffness within the musculoskeletal or fascial system needed to control or anchor down for movement at a more distal segment. And why I start with that definition is because then we want to think about what creates stiffness. So what creates stiffness in the musculoskeletal system or stiffness in the fascial system is, can be multiple things. But if we look at fundamental like muscular physiology, stiffness can be created from a contraction, the nervous system creating more of a, almost like a trigger point. So the nervous system creating some neurological stiffness, lowering the action potential in the cell for contraction. So when you have a lower action potential, that means there's less, like calcium that is needed to activate a contraction of the myosin and actin filaments of the muscle. Taking you back, physiology, right? So that is neurologically, our nervous system increases stiffness in that way. So this nervous system or neurological stiffness is often more from like a protective mechanism. So I shared on the last episode how I tend towards hypermobility, though I don't have a hypermobility disorder. And how that relates to neurological stiffness is when you tend towards hypermobility, your nervous system increases your respiratory rate, so creates hyperventilation. The hyperventilation then keeps us in a more sympathetic state, which creates more neurological stiffness. More than likely, this is because when you're hypermobile, you have more range of motion, and more range of motion means that your organs, your neurovascular structures are more at risk for getting injured, having adverse tension or adverse stretch applied to them, more compression. Your visceral organs are more exposed when you are able to open up and like present them to the world more. So this neurological stiffness is often a protective pattern, and we see this too with just general injuries, right? When we roll an ankle or we have a sore knee or a sore back, the muscles around that joint increase their stiffness neurologically, create a little bit of a co-contraction around the joint to limit mobility. And so oftentimes we have this from a neurological standpoint. This neurological stiffness, though, is not so efficient. This stiffness is more of a like batten down the hatches, limit mobility sort of thing. And so it does not also help good movement patterns. In fact, it creates poor movement patterns because it's just splinting things, and it doesn't allow for good dynamic alignment and dissociative movement patterns at different joints, etc. So, but it is a form of stiffness, and it can be important. This is also why it's so important to realize that when there is a neurological stiffness happening, your body is doing that on purpose. Your body is smarter than you, and so the worst thing that you could do is actually try to break it. So if you're finding that you have some sort of neurological stiffness, it's better to like take a step back and think about like, what is this protecting? And is this a global thing or is this a local thing? And problem solve it from that standpoint. And we see that a lot with people with back pain specifically. When you're in a flare up, everything stiffens up to protect you and to try to offload whatever the pathology is that maybe is part of the pain generator. And so it's like, your back spasms, and then you get a little uncomfortable from the tightness of the muscles. But so you go and get a massage, and the massage therapist like breaks through that neurological stiffness, right? Inhibits it, and you get rid of it. And then you stand up, and what happens? You hurt actually even more. And so oftentimes when I see a protective pattern like that, it's like, I don't really want to break it. I tell my athletes a lot, I'm like, I don't really want to get rid of your spasm. We have to figure out why you're spasming first before I just globally get rid of it, and then have a strategy to create some stiffness in a different way so the body feels protected. And so these other types of stiffness are muscular stiffness and physiological muscular stiffness, I guess, if you want to categorize this. So you've got the muscular stiffness by an actual conscious contraction of a muscle. That contraction of a muscle, whether it's concentric or eccentric, is creating stiffness within the tissue. So this would be like bracing, right? So if you want to create some stiffness across your core, an easy way to do it is to brace, right? To contract your muscles. Physiological stiffness there's kind of two physiological stiffnesses. We can have physiological stiffness from the physiology of the muscle components. So we learned in fundamental physiology class, when a muscle hypertrophies, the muscle cells, the sarcomeres, get laid down in layers. When you have hypertrophy and muscle cells that go in layers, that naturally increases the stiffness. I always tell people, imagine you have yellow TheraBand. Yellow TheraBand is very stretchy. It's not very stiff at all. But if we put 10 layers of yellow TheraBand together and try to stretch them as a unit, it is more stiff than one layer, right? So that's a type of stiffness that can be helpful, and that only comes from hypertrophied muscles. How do you hypertrophy a muscle? You make it stronger. You have to add load, and a lot of load, in order to get stronger, to have a hypertrophy response to the muscle, which requires time under tension. Then you have a stiffness that happens from a pressure and container standpoint in the fascia. So the best way that most people are familiar with that is like the intra-abdominal pressure phenomenon of trunk stiffness. You have this, it's basically called a hydraulic amplifier effect, where you have a closed container, and you change the pressure on it. So like in this container, we think about like the diaphragm, the respiratory diaphragm, the pelvic floor diaphragm, and then you have the walls of the abdomen and trunk. This is the container. When we contract, right, when we take an inhale breath and the diaphragm drops down, it changes the pressure on the container, right? The pressure then pushes out on the walls of the container, and you have a reflexive pushback from the container walls into the pressure. It is the thought process of like putting wind in the sails, right? When you put wind into the sail becomes taut and it sort of pushes back into the wind, and that's what propels a boat. So this is called the hydraulic amplifier effect. When we change the pressure like this, we have that reflexive contraction back into it. It also is more efficient. It requires less energy to create the contraction because the stiffening is coming from sort of the fascial components of it. And we also get this not just with the intra-abdominal pressure like breath hold or Valsalva maneuver, but we get this when we have the dynamic alignment in our body that allows for all of our fascial containers to be sort of stacked up on another. And when they're stacked up and in good alignment, then when we go to move them, the fascial containers create this hydraulic amplifier effect everywhere. You can feel it in your quads, you can feel it in your thoracolumbar fascia, you can feel it in your forearms, you can feel it in your calves, all areas that basically have a lot of fascial compartments. So the low leg, the thigh, the trunk, the forearms are big areas of fascial containers. The neck is actually one of them too. And so this is how learning how to tap into that, finding that good dynamic alignment in our fascial containers is so important. And the best way I've found to find this dynamic alignment, I've already sort of spoke on, because it has to do with understanding how to control our center of mass and staying upright or in balance. And that is learning how to weight shift on your feet and having an anterior weight shift on your feet. When you can anterior weight shift on your feet, it's an active dorsiflexion. And this active dorsiflexion really primes the whole unit, the whole organism for movement. And if we take a step back and think about what active dorsiflexion is and how it developed, and if we watch a baby and how it develops, their feet are always very active into dorsiflexion. Their hands are active. Your hands and feet are sensory organs. And it is this active hand and feet always searching for information to give the organism more information of where it is in space, so the output can be organized, the output being movement or stability or whatever. And so the keys to having good dynamic alignment and having this hydraulic amplifier effect create some fascial stiffness and provide some stiffness, reflexive stiffness to our core and our body, has a lot to do with understanding weight shifts and understanding how to have an active sensory system. So the way I teach it, and the way I've learned it and can feel it best to reflexively happen in my body, is having active dorsiflexion, active hands, an active head and neck, and a 3-dimensional breath. In which, if you go back to development, this is all the things that the baby does as it starts to learn how to move itself. Active head and neck come first. This is part of what helps drop the diaphragm down in the first place and become a postural stabilizing muscle, in addition to a respiratory muscle. And then exploring the world with your hand and feet, period. And what this looks like in movement too is understanding that our weight shift on our feet or our weight shift on our pelvis allows this dynamic alignment of all the fascial containers to always set up our muscles and our fascia in a way that we get that hydraulic amplifier effect. So creating contraction and stiffness costs less. Costing less is key, and reflexively being able to turn on without you thinking about it is key. And that's the difference between bracing and using muscle contractions just for stiffness. The great part is as you get stronger and increase your stiffness through hypertrophy, then you have more stiffness to play around with this hydraulic amplifier effect. So they are important for each other. One without the other is less effective. And from a weight shifting standpoint, this means that our body weight shifts in a combined pattern so that we're always maintaining these alignments of our fascial containers, and understanding the weight shift is important. And when you can actually cue the weight shift in someone's body, there's a lot less to cue in a movement standpoint. So for example, when you go to rotate, the direction you rotate, you should weight shift to that side. When you do that, you don't have to then cue like an abdominal contraction or cue a good hip stability or whatever you're cueing. It literally happens reflexively, which is great because movement is an output. So the more time I spend trying to cue an output, I'm just wasting my breath, and it's not going to stick for my clients anyways. And so this understanding how the weight shifts in our body combined with maintaining this hydraulic amplifier effect is key. So, feeling the first place I felt these combinations of things happening was Pilates. Loading the springs up on the reformer enough so that it created enough stiffness for me to connect into, to find my stiffness was key. And in someone that is more hypermobile, you need it heavier than you think, right? So there's going to be a bell curve with the resistance pattern, whether that resistance is a spring or mass. The heavier I lift, the better connection into my stiffness I'll get until it's too much, and then I'll be less. So you want to play with the resistance and find what your bell curve is. Load is so important to find stiffness. And this is fundamentally one of the things that I was doing wrong, is I wasn't actually loading enough. I was keeping the weights too low. I was a little bit afraid, because of my history of back pain, of doing an exercise that was too heavy. And so I never fully actually was lifting things heavy enough to get a reflexive stiffness. And so that is my number one rule for people with back pain, is actually to lift heavy things and figure out what heavy is for you. And you'll know it because you'll feel yourself reflexively click on the stabilizers that you're trying to do cognitively in a physical therapy setting. And it's just not happening. Getting out of a posterior weight shift, going anterior weight shift is almost always what people need. When you can be in the right spot on your feet, you'll feel this reflexive lift within your core, lift within your body. Your body feels more on top of your legs. This is, again, a reflexive fascial stiffness or fascial tensegrity. So it is a combination of all the things. When I'm lifting heavy, if I am good about my dynamic alignment, it takes less heavy to reflexively click onto my core. And over time, as I lifted heavy and got stronger, and this means that you have to dedicate time to an actual strength training program to get strong. And let me repeat that. Dedicating time to a strength program to get strong. Not a strength program to do like high intensity cardio stuff, not a strength program to just check the box of lifting weights, but an actual program that gets you strong and hypertrophies your muscles to increase the stiffness. That's needed because, like I said, when we have a stiffer muscle contributing into these fascial containers, then the hydraulic amplifier effect is even better. So stiffness is really important. And what I love about it is because now it's correcting our movement patterns and it's making us feel better by changing the sensory experience. This is what changing the sensory experience is through weight shifts and is through load. And when I talk about increasing load and lifting heavy, what I don't mean is like squatting 1,000,000 pounds or doing a heavy bench press necessarily. Those things can be great if you want, but it can be more simple than that. It can literally be like picking up a weight. So like if you want to call that something, if you do a single arm version, picking up a weight and you bend down to pick it up and then stand up with it, if it's heavy enough, you'll feel your core reflexively turn on. That's called a single arm deadlift. Keeping your weight forward on your feet. Using all the good patterns, but again, when you can feel things reflexively happening, you don't have to worry about it so much. So I would say if you're having to think too much about where your hips are or what your feet are doing or where your knees are at or where things are, then it's not heavy enough. So think heavier weight and make it easy for yourself, right? Like when my back hurts, I can't pick something up from the floor. So I start with the weight a little bit higher on like a bench. So I'm picking it up from the bench, but again, be heavy enough. And maybe all I'm doing is picking it up and walking it to a different bench and putting it down. So like a farmer's carry or a suitcase carry. These actions are so powerful. Much more powerful than like a chop and lift or a Palloff press or a pillar bridge or what other anti-rotation stability exercises are there? Like all this fancy stuff, Russian twists, or like there's all of these exercises that are so fancy for core control, which can be under the category of anti-rotation exercises that actually don't do that great in increasing your stiffness. So by just lifting a heavy weight, you increase your stiffness. So lift heavier. Also, too, understanding that core control and creating core stiffness doesn't always have to be with a spine that's not moving. In fact, it's probably more helpful if the spine moves through flexion and extension. And one of the first ways that I felt the core container of my abdomen click on and like what it really felt like for this hydraulic amplifier effect to be transmitted through the thoracolumbar fascia via the interfascial triangle, which is called the lateral raphe, which is a key spot that the posterior part of our trunk and the anterior part of our trunk connect, is actually keeping my weight shift forward and doing a spinal roll down. So a spinal roll down going into full flexion, and those of you in the strength world might recognize this as a Jefferson curl. But going into full flexion and keeping your weight forward on your feet and not allowing it to shift back too much actually allows you will feel more of a deep core connection because you finally connect into that entire fascial container of the thoracolumbar fascia. And you'll feel this connection just to the sides. I feel it just to the sides of my paraspinals and then deep into my core, like belly button area. And this is that deep connection into the interfascial triangle. And the cool thing is how this makes sense. And when you know you're there is reflexively what's happening is reflexively you're turning on your core and you're connecting into your body to prevent yourself from falling over. If I weight shift too far forward, what happens? I fall over. So what I feel reflexively happens is this stall, this break in my body, in my spine, in my fascia to not fall over. That is a really powerful reflexive thing to feel. And this is why it always kind of blows my mind that it goes back to this fundamental understanding of controlling your balance and controlling your center of mass. So, controlling your center of mass, understanding weight shifts, lifting heavy enough to create stiffness and hypertrophy of the muscle to then tap into the fascial stiffness or physiological stiffness. Be okay when your body adds neurological stiffness to it. The cool thing about neurological stiffness or trigger points will go away as you give your body more physiological and muscular stiffness. You will have less trigger points in your body when you get stronger and when you can find your dynamic alignment so your core containers can create this hydraulic amplifier effect. That's actually the best way to combat neurological stiffness. So tight trigger points, and it's not to drop an elbow on it. It's not to smash the shit out of it with self-massage tools. It's actually to give the nervous system more stiffness so it feels safer and doesn't have to be in protection mode anymore. So most of my hypermobile people, which a lot of people with low back pain are historically people who have a lot of movement available. Instead of just doing a lot of mobility work and cognitive, conscious control of core control, they need more stiffness in all the ways. So that's it. Now, the wonderful thing is from actually going through some good, heavy strength training programs, shout out Alice and Tenny and the Den, I now have created enough hypertrophy in my muscles where I have a little bit extra physiological stiffness now. So when I am in good alignment and my core containers are happy, the reflexive stiffness I create is enough. And even in instances when my back could flare up, it doesn't as much. So, for example, when I eat food that doesn't bode well on my gut, and my gut muscles go back into that splinting pattern to protect my organs, I don't have back pain anymore because I have that added physiological stiffness from the muscle hypertrophy. And so I'm still a little bit more protected from a disc load standpoint than I was beforehand. And that is like the best gift ever. And so now, since I added in heavy lifting, heavy with an asterisk, right? Heavy enough to feel that reflexive connection, which is heavier than I would have thought, but not as heavy as maybe a strongman lifts. I have less flare-ups, and if I do have a flare-up, it barely lasts a day. Which, I briefly talked about in the last episode, like what I do when I have a flare-up. One is not panic. The worst thing I could do is panic. That just creates a nervous system potential for increased pain and increased disability. I meet myself where I'm at, and I also use medicine. Understanding that when my disc material gets exposed to the nerve root, and that disc material is chemotoxic and very toxic to the nerve root, and that's part of what creates the pain, I have no problem using an anti-inflammatory to combat that, because sometimes a chemical reaction requires chemicals to buffer it. Now, are there natural things that I could take and do that are anti-inflammatory? Yes, I do those too. But frankly, I don't like to be in pain for that long, because I don't. And I take because sometimes when I've shared that it's okay to use ibuprofen or an NSAID to treat a flare-up, I've gotten some pushback from people because of the role the anti-inflammatories play on blunting the healing process. And I just have to say that person has probably never experienced discogenic back pain before, number one. Number two is it's not forever. It's often just 1 to 3 days of medicine. And so it's not, it's not blunting the healing response that much. And then also, this is not an acute thing. This is a chronic thing. This is the moment I had the opportunity for a great acute healing response has come and gone probably 20 years ago. And so I really feel like the risk of using the anti-inflammatories, the risk of it preventing some sort of healing response, is worth the benefit of getting out of pain and being able to go back to the things that I know are helpful in preventing back pain and flare-ups. All the things I told you, increasing the stiffness with exercise, walking, manual lymph drainage. I didn't even touch on that, but that's a big part too of the gut health thing, like eating well, doing visceral manipulation, keeping my ankle mobility up so I can anterior weight shift and connect and reflexively connect into my core, learning how to segmentally control my spine that does have segmental instabilities around it. All of those things I know that are helpful and useful in long-term spine health, I do. And if I want to facilitate a more rapid return and be more comfortable by taking an NSAID, then that is my option. And I'm all about informed consent and autonomy when it comes to treatment plans. So I understand the risks of taking the ibuprofen, and I make that decision for my own body. And I'm big on this with all my athletes. Like, pharmaceuticals, I get it. The industry is shit, but modern medicine and pharmaceuticals, I am very grateful for, and they can serve a very important purpose. But like everything, they don't come without risk. So as long as you have an informed consent in terms of like, you understand the risks, you understand the options, and you are choosing what seems best for you and your body in that moment, then that is your prerogative. Your body, your choice, always. Doesn't matter what the topic is. Your body, your choice. I tell my athletes this all the time. Here are your options, your body, your choice. There are risks with everything we do. I am not here to tell you how to operate. I'm here to give you the knowledge that I have, the knowledge that I use to make my informed decision. And when I get more knowledge, when my knowledge changes, that means my decision might change in the future. But for right now, the 1 to 2 flare-ups I have, if even that in a year, I have no problem grabbing the ibuprofen because that is the thing that works the best for me. And while doing all this other stuff, this is not a 6-month fix. This is a lifetime fix, right? Like, I know that there are times in my life when I get away from strength training, it's a ticking time bomb. How much time can I get away from strength training before I start to lose, right, to atrophy and lose a little bit of that hypertrophy stiffness? So I have to decide how many times per week I train, how many weeks per month or weeks per year I train in order to keep enough stiffness in my body to protect my spine. And understand too all the aspects of my nervous system and my gut health and all the other things that go into it, because back pain and back injuries and disc problem, like this is the best example of like a whole organism problem, and it's not one thing. So anyways, I hope this 3-part series was helpful for you. I am working on a downloadable freebie for like my top 10 things to consider with back pain, and hope to launch that soon, but it will be kind of a summary of all the stuff I shared here. And yeah, so I'm sure we'll talk more on these points in future episodes, and you've probably even seen some similarities of other things I've talked about. But my back surgery, like the lessons, like what I've learned from any injury, not just my back, but like my knee surgeries, my back surgery, like shoulder pain, neck pain, like my foot injuries, like my body, your body is your best teacher. And that is the gift of injuries. That is the gift of feeling things in your body, you learn from it. And so as sucky as that whole experience was, and I definitely don't want to go through it again, it was worth it. It's taught me so much. It's taught my athletes and my clients and the people I teach so much. And what a great gift that is, to be able to learn from our body. And also, it has been the impetus in my life to learn how to trust my body and learn how to make friends with it and realize that everything my body is doing, it's doing for me, not against me. And that is like a really important relationship to heal with our bodies. And I think there's a lot of ways society minds fucks us into thinking there's something wrong with us and something wrong with our body when it doesn't look a certain way or act a certain way. And it's like, this is a journey back to ourselves and back to realizing like how amazing we are, how amazing our body is, no matter what it looks like, what shape it looks like, what movements it can or can't do at this time. Like, we're so lucky to be in this vessel. It's the only one we get. So why would you want to spend your lifetime fighting with it? I actually regret the years of my life that I was fighting with it. And I wish I could go back and tell myself, like, dude, your body's working for you, not against you. Why are you fighting with it? Cherish it. it's not yours forever. So anyways, with that said, wrapping it up. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next week.